Good evening, those of you out there in Zoom land. This is our third Obermann conversation of the fall semester. And I am Jennifer New. I'm the Associate Director of the University of Iowa's Obermann Center for Advanced Studies. And just a very brief introduction to this series. Obermann Conversations is intended to put researchers, scholars, artists, students, and staff from the University of Iowa in conversation with people from the greater community. And actually, thanks to moving on Zoom, greater community has grown, as you'll see tonight, because we're reaching all the way down I-80 to Des Moines. But around a shared topic of interest and expertise. So before we get into tonight, I just wanted to let you know that our next Obermann conversation will be on February 4th, and a very, very timely topic of reproductive justice with two University of Iowa faculty members and then several a doula and a director of a local clinic and some others. So that is on February 4th. So tonight, as we talk about economic development as social justice, we are inviting in several different speakers. And as we prepared for this, it was quite obvious to me that these folks all know very deeply what they're talking about. And I really chose to pass the baton to my friend and colleague, Travis Kraus. So Travis is the director of the Iowa Initiative for Sustainable Communities. He is also, as we were just discussing, a longtime business owner in Iowa City, not at the moment, but in the past, and is also an artist. So he's bringing all sorts of hats to the table, but I think specifically his work around the state. So Travis is going to moderate tonight, and I get to sit back and listen a little bit more. So Travis, thank you so much for taking on this role.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Jen. And also, I just want to say thanks to the Obermann Center and the Iowa City Public Library for having us and hosting these conversations. Really thankful for that, and to you, Jen, for helping get us all together. So thanks very much. And so yeah, I'm director of the Iowa Initiative for Sustainable Communities, and as of last year, I also took on a new role, which was to become part of the faculty of the School of Planning and Public Affairs as well. So that's another thing that I'm doing that I think also probably relates to the conversation that we're having, since we do have economic development people in training in our department as well. So, and it's really an honor for me to get to introduce people whose work I admire greatly and who I've gotten to know over the last few years. And so I'm gonna share what we have here as kind of the formal titles, but there's a lot of other work that I know you're all doing, and hopefully you take some time to share that as well. So first of all, Tracy John Sargent, the founder and executive director of the Multicultural Development Center of Iowa. Thank you for joining us, Tracy. Also joined by Matthew Gilbert, attorney, entrepreneur, coach, founder and president of the Iowa Core Inc., and also the economic development chair for the Iowa Nebraska NAACP. And I know that this is an abbreviated list, so there's a lot more things that you do, I know. And then Daria Fisher-Page, who is a wonderful faculty partner for me in the work that we do with IISC, clinical associate professor of law and director of the Community Empowerment Law Project at the College of Law here at the University of Iowa. So really great to be able to share this Zoom screen with you all. And I thought before we kind of jump into some of the questions that we have for our panelists, I also wanted to share, I guess, something that might help frame the conversation and kind of tapping into the work that I did prior to coming to the University of Iowa. I was an economic development professional. I worked in Southeast Iowa, and so for people that don't quite know what all of those things mean, I think it's kind of relevant and important to think about how the thing that I wanted to kind of share off the bat is the metrics that we use to determine what economic development success looks like, right? And I think if we start talking about how economic development can support or harm communities, I think that some of these metrics kind of factor into that as well. So in my work as an economic developer, the ways that we measured success were things like the number of new jobs that were created in the community, the number of new businesses. We would measure things like retail sales per capita. Obviously, like a lot of economic development is to increase your tax base. You measure like the dollars of private investment in the community. So those are the types of things that we use, kind of very much like business bottom line types of numbers. What I think is missing in there is social justice, right? Like we're not actually measuring the ways that we are seeing changes in other economic indicators that are equally as important, maybe more important. So given kind of like that very, very basic overview of the way that economic developers have traditionally thought, I would say it's also kind of changing, right? About economic development. We wanted to kind of start off with examples of ways that economic development, maybe just kind of the relationship between economic development and social justice, or ways that it's been used as a tool to promote social justice. Or maybe if you want to talk about ways that it hasn't been good for social justice. So I'm going to kick it over to Matthew, maybe to kind of talk a little bit about that idea, that relationship, and maybe how that relates to your work.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to this, Travis and Jennifer. I'm really excited to continue to have this conversation. Economic development, specifically as you spoke to, Travis, has historically had a very line item type of analysis and metrics. What's happening now is economic development is becoming more transformative. And that means that we're not only looking at how does a project or how does a local economy, how does it, measure its scale, right? How does it measure its success? But also how do the people, right? How do the people that actually have to, use the particular instruments, use transportation, use buildings, how are they spending their dollars? We're actually finding that we're getting a lot more information around the people that are actually frequenting a particular location or actually citizens of a particular geographical area. And because of that, now we're able to really start to learn how to actually impact their lives more intimately than ever before. Now we're actually looking at what are some of those social determinants of health, right? What are some of those sort of life and well-being factors? What are the sort of specifically, we oftentimes leave off the live birth rate and some other sort of health measures that really impact social justice specifically. And now that we are having this economic development lens, now we can actually, I would say it's going to be a heavy lift, but we can actually have developers and have local officials actually look at the impact of not only just transactions that are going on in the community, but how lives are being transformed by creating new creative places, creating new open spaces, as well as measuring also the dollars that are being spent in a particular location. So when I think of social justice and I think of economic development, I think that they're very, very intimately involved, especially because we are literally doing economic development things, not just for a local jurisdiction, but also for the people themselves. And so bringing that human-centered analysis is really helping to really explore and helping to really build out the social justice lens. I'll be as brief as I can in that respect, Travis.
Yeah, well, thank you. And yeah, I see, like you've articulated, that there are different ways to evaluate economic development success, right? And it is more people focused. And the other thing that I think is really interesting and an opportunity for thinking differently about metrics is just looking at disparities between groups, right? So that's another thing that comes to mind for me. If we were actually measuring those things and our ability to impact and close those gaps, then I think we're actually addressing real needs, right, for people that have been left out of the conversation.
Mhm. Oftentimes, exactly where you're speaking, economic development professionals, they're literally trying to make a best case scenario out of whatever they're working with, right? And so they definitely are using more of an asset based type of analysis. However, oftentimes we forget about who are the actual benefactors. And so a lot of voices are being left off the table in that respect. And so now as we start to look at social justice, when I think of justice, I think of really being able to reach those that are being the most harmed, right? And so as we think about who is being harmed by economic development, oftentimes those are the communities that aren't involved in the process, or those are the communities that projects are going up in their neighborhoods and they don't necessarily know how to belong in that space. And so I do feel like the disparity lens is important, but it's really important for us to continue to have this asset-based analysis, especially for those communities that oftentimes don't get to be a part of that puzzle.
Yeah.
Travis, if I could just jump in here real quick. I know when we had our initial conversation, we talked about kind of wanting to use some numbers to frame some of our statements. And I had a chance to be part of the big sort, and I grabbed some statistics from that workshop. And one of the things that really struck me, and it's kind of, I think, along the lines of what Matthew's talking about from an asset based, is the disparity that exists. And I do some work in the community with a partner that's very involved in affordable housing. And I take a look at the high poverty rates and the fact that Johnson County poverty rate for 2019 was 16%. That's 60% higher than the 2019 national average of 10.4%. So I think that's a really powerful indicator that there's obviously some disparities. We have increase in diversity in our communities. We have people, migrating to Iowa, yet our poverty rate is higher. And so to me, when we talk about job creation, economic development, those are all things that don't seem to be helping the fact that Iowa has a very high poverty rate and Johnson County has a higher poverty rate than the national average.
Yeah, I think that very much the question that comes to my mind was really economic development for whom, right? And historically, it's been for a very specific, limited part of the community, and maybe under the guise of, a rising tide will raise all ships, all boats. But really, we know that that's not true now, right? I mean, I always think of like the stadium project sort of as the quintessential big economic development project that never quite pans out the way or maybe it does pan out the way it's supposed to. Maybe that's exactly the problem, right? But the stadium that's going to bring jobs and bring consumers and new businesses and restaurants, right? But we have to displace and fracture a neighborhood that exists and raise a community center or a school, or right, and that the people in the community aren't the people who are going to get those new jobs or open those new businesses or everything that flows from that.
Daria, that's a great point. And I think if we look at the numbers for the job and economic growth in Johnson County, when we look at the types of jobs that have seen that growth, these are not jobs that are going to facilitate generational wealth. Right. So to your point, who is this really benefiting? Right. We're seeing growth in some of these, jobs, but they're not high demand, high impact, high wealth, type of jobs. So, what are we really doing when we talk about economic development? We look at TIF, funding options for some of these development projects. Who is that really benefiting? If we have high poverty rates, we have an economic growth, but it's still, very low entry level type of position. So I think we need to address what we're providing access to and what can create pathways for individuals to be able to contribute, because economic development is the creation of that wealth. And if it's one-sided or if it's disproportionate to people that maybe are of a different ethnic makeup, then it's not. That's where social justice comes into play. So I think we need to take a real hard look at that and why the numbers continue to work out year after year the way that they have.
Yeah, Tracy, one of the things that comes to mind as you talk about that is the way that we incentivize economic development and how it allows for people to remain in those impoverished situations, right? So you can receive public dollars, right, for economic development, if you produce a certain number of jobs that are above a wage threshold. But that means that you can also create a number of jobs where people aren't earning a livable income, right? So economic development policy can sometimes, with this idea that like you're increasing like the tax base, you keep the number of jobs, all of those things, like what are the quality of those jobs is a big question. I think that should be answered. And are there jobs that are not supporting people's livelihoods in a very real way?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make this a tax conversation, but don't get me started on Iowa's, high tax rate, the fact that Johnson County collects the highest property tax in Iowa, levying an average of like $2,526. That's 143% of the median home value yearly in property taxes. Like that is a major limiting factor, and that is a huge barrier for people. So, I mean, we need to take a look at this holistically, and I think these types of conversations are great to show what some of us are doing in that space, but educate other individuals to make sure they understand the numbers that support the need for our organizations, the need for our programs.
So another thing that I thought we decided was going to be important for people that are kind of new to or really don't understand economic development. Maybe we could just share a few examples of things. So I talked about one where there's essentially a job creation incentive, so businesses can receive public dollars. Another one that comes to mind for me, I mean, this is a big federal policy, and it's opportunity zones. And so opportunity zones allow for people to, defray some of their capital and gains taxes and invest them into a low income census tract. And so that's a tool for attracting private dollars to an area in need. I think there's a lot of debate about whether or not that's achieving the goals that it's been set that were described from the beginning. And I think it probably depends on where that project occurs. But that's an example of using economic development with the idea of promoting social justice in an impoverished area. So that's I guess a federal one is. So if anybody has any other kind of examples that help kind of explain this relationship, or we can move on to the next question.
Yeah. One area is you'll find this a lot on the West Coast, but you see all these new municipalities kind of popping up, these suburbs, right? These new incorporated these new incorporated regions, right? Something called political subdivisions basically become the go-to for creating entirely new communities, as well as new utilities, new industries, and more importantly, new jobs. And so what you'll find is that where there's a lot of open land or there's a lot of sort of urban sprawl, you'll also see these really small incorporated kind of municipalities coming up as a means to, as you talk about economic development, as a means to grow, as a means to measure, but also as a means to monitor, really like Tracy said, sort of the wealth creation and the wealth generation that's actually going on in a particular area. So definitely paying attention to how communities are growing, how new municipalities or new suburbs are kind of popping up. It's not just about the housing. It also relates to actually creating new facilities and new utilities and just new structures within areas that often are underdeveloped or haven't been developed at all.
And I think it has to be done in a very careful way with an eye on the way that it's impacting people, right? So Daria started talking a little bit about the history of, and I know I don't want to linger too long on all of because Matthew, I know that you want to talk about assets and what we're doing now, but I think it's fair that we should acknowledge that economic development has served to harm communities of color in the past, especially, right? So if we think about urban renewal or public highways, those are often displacing people with this idea that like they're blighted neighborhoods or something like that, and those were intentionally done and caused real harm to people. So I think we need to know that there is this history of economic development being a problem, not being a tool to help people, right?
And And to lean into that a little bit more, it's really the economic development policy itself that sort of creates this violence that you're talking about. And oftentimes, if we have good policy around economic development, right, then I think we have ultimately a really good positive good, both a net positive on both ends with economic development. So it's not a bad tool, but when we have sort of lackluster policy or policy that's just sort of one-sided, it can easily get lost of those that are being harmed by the economic development practice.
I love that. And I'd like to spend a little bit more time talking about that and kind of bringing it home to us locally. I think about the increasing limits on local control. And this is not a politics statement at all. I'm not saying I'm for or against more government, but I think about this trend since 2018. Iowa has kind of joined this national trend of putting more limits on local control. So it limits Iowa City, Johnson County from being able to do things like set a minimum wage to get us closer to a living wage. The use of traffic cameras. I'm a tech guy, so I'm always worried about privacy and things like that. Other hot topics that we've all talked about lately, requiring masks in schools, limiting that access limits our local elected officials from making policies that are actually in our best interests. So that's a big issue. And that obviously is happening at a national level. So I think it's going to require efforts on all of our parts to get engaged, get informed, and then do what we can to use our voice and our privilege to try to help address how we're making local policy while we still have that control. If it continues to trend the way that it is, it's going to be less and less control locally. So we need to fight for that. And we need to make sure that everyone's educated and they use their voice and their privilege to do that.
Yeah, Tracy, I couldn't agree with that more. And my law students work with a variety of clients around the state, organizations, small towns, regional entities, rural, urban, and subject matter wise, sort of all over the map, everything from the bias motivated ordinance in Iowa City to land banks, right? We really do pretty diverse work. And I spent some time before this conversation trying to think about what really the common theme was, besides sort of the skill set, right? And really the common theme is entities, municipalities, organizations trying to wrest back or assert some control over something more local to them, right? Whether it's creating a new policy, or it's figuring out if they can do something despite a state law or a state policy, right? But I think that idea of sort of the local control has been really apparent in the work that I've done here in the few years I've been here.
Yeah, I'm grateful to have been a part of some of those projects. And
I think you brought most of them to me. So.
That's the extent of what I was able to offer. So the other thing that I think is actually quite important here and kind of it ties into the way that we, in a class that I co-taught with a few other faculty members, I'll name them just to give them credit for the work that they did. Lois Arthur and Chuck Connerly and Mark Bruckner and I co-taught a class last year, thinking about the intersection of arts and culture and economic opportunity, which is a phrase that I think kind of speaks more to like the kind of ideas that we're talking about. And I hadn't really made this connection before, but this idea of local control, I mean, it still matters who's at the local level, who is at the table, at the decision-making table, right? And so our work was really trying to bring perspectives that may not have been well represented in that decision-making process, especially as we're dealing with how to recover from pandemic, we're not deal with the pandemic, right? And other social unrest that we've experienced in the last year and a half. And so I think that's another important element, and maybe it's even more local, like local control, where you have the people, and Tracy, this is something that you talked about when we were working in that class together. You said the people closest to the issue or closest to the, hopefully I'm not stealing your thunder, people closest to the issue or closest to the solution. And that has just stuck with me, and that has been a driving force for the way that we think about how are we contributing something to this conversation.
Yeah, I can't take credit for that. I got that from Tom Banta from ICAD, who I really enjoy working with. But I do think there's a lot of truth to that. Those of us that are closest to that problem are I think more likely to be closest to a solution that would actually work. And you talked earlier about people having a seat at the table. If we take a look at all this increased awareness of and addressing systemic racism, I'm grateful that we have some good that's come out of these really horrible, tragic events. But I look across the ecosystem that I'm part of, and I don't see as much change as we should have seen by now. I don't see those numbers changing. That diversity and what the people look like that are involved in these things hasn't really changed that much. And so somehow we have to figure out how to make that change, how to empower those people that are closest to that, that have those shared lived experiences. Just to be super direct, people that look like Matthew and myself, right? We have those shared lived experiences that some of these policymakers can never have. They can't truly have empathy because there's no way they know what it's like to be a Black man in Iowa. So I think we have to figure out how to realign or adjust that ratio. I don't have all the answers. I don't know how we do that. I think Matthew and I have taken control of that and decided we're going to create programs. We're going to start organizations. We're going to partner with people that share our values. It's why I started the collective with V from Astig Planning. We thought it was really important to try to come together and increase our numbers, increase our strength so that we could start to tip the scale. And we're all doing racial equity related work. So why not figure out how to collaborate and come together? I think we just need to see more of that.
Yeah, a lot of current economic policy is still driven by our census, which is our 10-year sort of decennial analysis of basically population in a particular geographic area. It is very kind of blanket. It doesn't really get to some of the depth that we're talking to here. And so it really is important that you are speaking to your policy leaders, you are educating them, you are helping them to learn about new things that are going on in your local jurisdiction, but also that you find those gaps and that you're able to really call them out. Oftentimes, economic development policy just kind of goes by the wayside as a way of kind of shifting money around particular places. And I think it's bigger than that, as you led with, Travis, that it's also about the people. It's just not about the profit.
Yeah, another thing that I've been really thinking about and tried to find some research that might support this, and I don't think it's well understood yet, but it's kind of flipping this question around economic development as a tool for social justice. Is social justice a tool for economic development? Are communities that value people going to be more sustainable and thrive, right? And my instinct tells me yes, and I think this is an important question for Iowa too, that's seeing rapid demographic changes, right? And I, as somebody that thinks about sustainability holistically, which is environmental, economic, and social sustainability, like that piece is incredibly important and increasingly important across the state of Iowa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's important that when we talk about social justice being an impetus to economic development, that we're thinking of social justice in its broadest sense, but also making sure that we're identifying those benefactors and who's going to benefit, right? Specifically because there are areas or there are financiers that when you talk about economic development and you're kind of mixing in social justice, then they feel like it's just a charity. Right? There's no investment value. There's no return. And that if anything, there's going to be a loss or I would never get my money back is what the banks would possibly say. Specifically wanting to invest in an area. I'm in Waterloo right now. Our northeast side, which we call the east side of Waterloo, is an area where banks just feel like if I have to invest there, I would never get my money back. And so that means that the banks don't even know who the people are that are here, right? They don't even invest in the human capital. And so oftentimes when we speak of social justice, that we have to make sure we are clear, because a lot of folks just feel like it's just a charity case or a charity opportunity where there isn't real metrics for monetary value or economic value that could be exchanged.
Yeah, Matthew, that really makes me think a lot about some of the conversations I have with my students about how they lawyer, but it's hard not to imagine that the people at the bank haven't actually spent a lot of time in that part of the community, right? And haven't talked to people, and how many of our policies, I mean, economic development and otherwise, have gone awry because people just don't leave the place where they're comfortable, right, to get to know the people and the places around them.
And thankfully, there are people like us that are approaching them, right? I mean, next week I have a meeting with Midwest One. A few weeks ago, I met with Green State Bank. We're trying to engage them because we are trusted advisors in the community. So we're trying to be a conduit for them so that they can understand what's going on in these communities. So thankfully, they've reached out. Sometimes it was us that initiated the conversation, and that's probably not important. What's important is that they've agreed to meet. They've agreed to hear from us what it is that they can do. How can they help shape policy within their own organizations? I mean, we all know redlining, is still a problem. The basis of that whole industry is based in racism. So they're going to need some help. And I know it's us paying the black tax and it's not fair, but in order for us to get closer to the change that we want to see, we're going to have to take that. And, Matthew and I are both big guys. We got big shoulders. I think we can handle it, but we definitely need more help from other people. We need other people to lift us up and kind of prop us up when we've got tough days. We've had a bad week. That's what happens when you battle, these types of issues on a daily basis like we do.
Tracy, do you mind just sharing a little bit about the work that you're doing at the Multicultural Development Center of Iowa?
Yeah, happy to. We started out really wanting to address the lack of diversity in STEM. Like I mentioned, I'm a technologist and I have been for 26 years. So I've been in IT, information technology, and throughout those almost 3 decades, I looked across the table. There was very rarely people that look like me, and that really started to weigh on me pretty heavily. And believing in Gandhi's words about being the change that we want to see, I decided to do something about it. So I started MDC Iowa 4 years ago with the express purpose of trying to figure out how we can address diversity in STEM. And I thought it started with access. I do believe that some of these things are basic human rights, right? Internet access, access to technology, access to resources, certainly access to education, more than just the canned education that we're providing in the public school system today. And that's not a dig on the public school system. I'm just saying that there's more that we need to give our students, especially our students of color, if they're going to be able to enter into some of these competitive high demand fields like science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So we started that. And then as we got into the community and understood what the need really was, the need was for support. In a lot of different ways. And most recently, what we've seen is a need for support in economic development. And so we launched an accelerator program that's specifically geared towards supporting BIPOC business owners. And that is our attempt to help support and address some of those inequities that exist within economic development. So we kind of focus on those two things. But anytime there's an opportunity to partner, work with, collaborate with, it's taken me pretty much all over this great state. It's allowed me to meet people like Matthew, where we find people that are like-minded, that we want to try to support and figure out how can we, leverage what you're doing instead of recreating the wheel. But more importantly, I think we're trying to create a change in our culture where it's not a zero-sum game, right? It is not, we have to get rid of this crab bucket mentality where people think they need to tear someone down in order for them to gain. And so we're just trying to normalize, access, normalize that support that we provide. And for us, we do that through, these types of programs. And we're a nonprofit, so it's free. We will never charge for any of our services. It's written in my will that we're never gonna, because we don't want socioeconomic status to ever be a barrier from someone learning for themselves whether or not STEM is something that they want to get into.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. And I can, I'm appreciative of the work that you're all doing there, and it seems to fill a need that's been expressed by the people that you're hoping to serve. We heard that these are the types of things that need to be happening in the Iowa City area, and you've stepped up, and your organization has stepped up to start doing that work. And we should probably hear a little bit more about. I think Waterloo. While there are issues and they're well documented and made national news, Waterloo is also becoming the model for how to build this framework. And Matthew, maybe you could talk more about Iowa Core, but also just what's going on there in Waterloo.
Yeah, really excited to share a little bit more about Iowa Core. We are really more of an advocacy group, and a lot of our focus is centered around really helping, as Tracy just mentioned, really to support, specifically to support historically disenfranchised communities as well as underserved businesses. And so we've been using our ecosystem model to really help build out and help really drive a lot of our resource development, resource distribution. And what we're really excited to really be kind of centered in is really our service network by really helping entrepreneurs, specifically BIPOC entrepreneurs, and then and in this particular region, Black entrepreneurs really get access to both government and non-governmental contracts. A lot of what we've been doing is really helping to build out supplier diversity in areas where folks didn't even realize there were there's supply chains that actually exist. One is in food, one is in local access to land, another is in both even technical resources, like Tracy is saying, as well as professional resources. These are areas where supply chains had just been historically, I'll just say it, just white. And now there's a way for us to really diversify those supply chains, but also a lot of what the work that we've had to do is kind of the hand holding with the capacity building and the capacity support, because a lot of these entrepreneurs may just be one contract away from really being able to build a sustainable business model, as well as to realize their dreams. And more importantly, to create that generational wealth. So we've been excited to open up the resource channels for that, as well as to be there hand in hand, side by side with these businesses as they grow and as they continue to scale. And it's been really exciting. Some of the work in Waterloo has been working with 24/7 Black and the Black Business and Entrepreneurship Accelerator. Another one has been in Waterloo working with our food co-op, which is We Arose, which is literally building the local food economy, specifically in urban communities. And we're working on some really exciting things with a local CDFI here in the region that is going to be a startup CDFI. So there's a lot of great momentum that's coming here in the Waterloo area. But this is definitely a testament to the state of Iowa and sort of where we're going and what the lens is going to be looking like as we approach the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, is that there's going to be a change. And as the change comes, it's important that we not only prepare the leaders for that change, but we also help them understand how to respond to that change. And that's where Iowa Core has been really as a part of that response, especially in a pandemic. We thought we were going to have all this programming, but what we found out what we really need to be doing is supporting organizations and the great things that are going on now. So really excited to continue this work and to continue to advocate for those that oftentimes don't get to advocate for themselves.
I just wanted to add to that because I'd be remiss if I didn't give a plug to the folks at 24/7 Black. The curriculum for our BIPOC Business Accelerator is based on their program. They take very much an open source approach and have made a lot of those resources available to us. So, they're practicing what they preach. They recognize that we're all in this together. We're one community. Their focus is on obviously Waterloo and Black Hawk County, but they're happy to help support the efforts for those of us that want to do similar work in our community. So I really have to give a big shout out to them for helping to support our efforts here.
Daria, or anybody really, I suppose, we know that local governments can play a large role in supporting this work, right? And there's this unique opportunity, really, I think people call it kind of like a once in a generation opportunity to use some American Rescue Plan funds to make good change happen. Are any of you talking to elected officials, or I know that there are examples of it not being used in a way that might support economic development or economic inclusion or social justice. So, Daria, do you want
Sure,
to
yeah.
talk a little bit about?
Yeah, so Travis is talking about, there's been some recent coverage about Scott County's, their Board of Supervisors, at least tentative decision to use somewhere in the ballpark of 7 to 10 million of their COVID stimulus money, essentially, to double the bed space of their juvenile detention facility. Despite really a lot of public outcry from residents, from kids, from advocates, from people who work within the system. It's been critiqued at the state level, at the national level, but they seem very focused on going ahead with the project, even though, right, they are using money that is intended to remedy some of the economic harms caused by the pandemic in a way that it's not really clear how it will remedy any of those economic harms, right? And what we do know about policing and incarceration and policing of youth all over this country, but particularly in the state of Iowa, is that increasing that bed space will likely mean that more kids of color are put into detention. And what we know about that is it's not effective, right? It doesn't make our communities safer. It makes kids more likely to recidivate when they come out. There's nothing rehabilitative about it. It's very expensive to keep a kid in a cage, basically. Right. And we know that there are other things like restorative justice that are much better uses of that money, or investing in preventative services. But that's not what we're choosing to do.
Yeah, I think that this is kind of one of those things that we can be thinking about, like, how do we enact change with the opportunities that are before us, right? And making these kind of decisions that I had a student last year that talked a lot about, like, a city budget reflects where that city's values lie, right? And the way that money is spent is tells you where the priorities are. And I think that was a really intuitive and insightful perspective that the student shared. And so there's this opportunity. And so Matthew and Tracy, are you guys having conversations about the funding that is now becoming available to cities supporting the work that you're doing?
Yeah, go ahead, Matthew.
Yeah, I was just going to say, one of the things that we did right away when the first stimulus bill was announced back in 2020 is we just started tracking the money. And so as a part of my work with the NAACP, we've actually been tracking where these dollars have been spent. And so we've been waiting for the American Rescues Act dollar bills to actually show up in the coffers for the local municipalities, because we've been advocating for them to create the infrastructure that's necessary for them to really not only just have a spendthrift, right, but to actually do meaningful investment. And what we found is that there was a lot of talk, but not a whole lot of action. And a lot of the investments from a lot of our COVID-related dollars have been very flat, right? Unfortunately, they've been very flat. Meanwhile, our retirement savings and some of the other areas that have just been spending, I would say, COVID dollars have continued to just create more wealth. And so we're just really finding a very linear and very illuminating discrepancy between how the public wants to spend dollars and how private folks are spending dollars. Private folks are spending dollars to create wealth. Public is spending dollars just to get rid of the money, or just to do a thing. And that's so unfortunate right now. So we really need that advocacy. We really need that information flow. And it's really important that you as a local local economic development professional, or even if you're just enthusiastic about this in your local neighborhood, that you actually visit a board of supervisors meeting and you actually learn how the county is spending money, and you actually help them in any way that you can to really explore what other options there are. Because right now we're just kind of finding that they're kind of picking what's comfortable and what's safe. And not actually doing that level of impact investing that we sort of talked about that is so important right now.
Yeah, and I don't know like what region that's specific to, but I can tell you that in Johnson County, as both part of my work at MDC Iowa and the Racial Equity Connect collective that I helped found, we have met with every single elected official. We have been involved in the initial planning and budgeting. I think they're taking an intentionally slow approach to how they're going to start allocating those funds. I just met with the city manager earlier this week. We talk again about where are we at? What's the timeline? Some of us are getting a little restless. We're wondering why you've had that money for several months now and we still haven't seen that. And I have a better understanding of how what that process looks like. I appreciate the collaborative effort, what they're trying to do between the city and Johnson County, so that we can minimize duplication of efforts. We can make sure that we understand how we're going to most efficiently allocate those funds. So I can speak for Johnson County, where I don't know that that is necessarily the case here yet. I'm not saying it couldn't be or won't be, but they have been very open to us, those of us that are kind of boots on the ground, grassroots type of organizations, helping to guide them and understand how they should divvy that up. And I am fairly certain that at least at the city level, a lot of the funding that they recommended to the council came directly from us. They really did take our suggestions to heart and really bake that into their proposal. And now, to Matthew's point, we need to make sure we hold people accountable. I definitely agree that people need to go to public input sessions. If you're going to have an opinion and you want to kind of get at people that are our elected officials, they need to hear your voice. So it's open to the public. Show up, take your 3 minutes, tell them how you feel, tell them what you want. And that way your voice was heard. And then maybe next election cycle, we make some changes if people didn't act on what the general public wanted. So I'm optimistic. I'm cautiously optimistic that the things that we're talking about, the planning we've been involved with, are actually going to pay out the way that we think they should.
And just for a reference, I was speaking to Polk County, Black Hawk County, and then I've seen some areas in out in Lynn County as well, where there's still this kind of, we're trying to figure it out kind of mode, which Tracy is speaking to. And that's why I said it's a great opportunity for advocates to really help strengthen the conversation.
So I think some of those kind of make a good segue into ways that we can think about how people can support social justice and economic justice and economic inclusion. And one thing that I'm proud to have been a part of with a lot of other amazing people is our highlighting stories of Black entrepreneurs in the Iowa City area. We put together a story map. This was the class that I mentioned earlier, called Girl Black Owned. And we had, it was really interesting to hear. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to bring perspectives that were not fully represented to these decision-making processes. But in the meantime, we were gathering these stories from entrepreneurs. Interestingly, one of the reasons that one of the students and one of our partners, Candace Smith from My Heart Black Business, talked about being here in Iowa City and not knowing that there is a too small but still pretty robust community of Black businesses. And one of the things that we wanted to do with that website was to highlight the businesses that do exist here, right? So that story map, which is now on the ICAT website, has a directory of all those things. But the thing that I find most profound is listening to the stories, reading the stories, and listening to the audio clips. And thank you, Tracy, for being one of those people. So it just as one bit of information, in addition to going to these elected official meetings, is that you can just support these businesses by going there as a consumer, right? People can donate to places like NBC Iowa that are doing this good work. And then, but I'm just interested in other ways that you think, anybody that watches this video, right, they're like, what can I do? Like, what are some of the thoughts that you have about ways that people can help advance this goal, right?
I didn't want to hog the mic, but I've got a list, right? Like, I love this question because we're small, but I feel like we've got a really big impact. Obviously, first and foremost, getting people more comfortable with the transfer of wealth is key, right? There was another stat I was going to read off that talked about how the income in Johnson County actually exceeds Iowa's average household medium income. there's a lot of people that have access to wealth, and I'm not here to debate whether they earned it or didn't earn it, but they have it, and there's a lot of good that can be done, a lot of privilege that people can leverage. We always need volunteers for our programs. Obviously, as a nonprofit, we are initially self-funded, starting to get some financial support from private donors. That is super key. And I think Daria mentioned earlier, actually, Travis, you mentioned the student that said the city budget is a really telling tale of what's important. I also think our philanthropic giving is very telling about what's truly important. And arts are super important. And I'm not saying that it isn't and that they don't deserve that, but there is a lot of good that needs to be done if we're going to be in this together and actually be stronger together. We need to find out how to redistribute some of that and support some of us that are in the trenches doing that work. So first and foremost, financial support. It's your time, talent, and treasury really is what we need from an MDC Iowa perspective.
All right, I'm going to defend the arts just for a second though, because I'm all for doing more of that stuff. And really, like, the way that I got involved with the project was because Boyce Arthur, who teaches in the Department of Theater Arts, was a key contributor to the mural project, the Oracles of Iowa City project downtown. And that was the impetus for, and impetus for, like, let's have larger community conversations. There's mixed feelings about that, I know, but that got us started on the work that we're doing, and that I'm glad to say we're continuing.
Now I feel like I have to walk back that statement because I love
all the money to the arts now. Okay.
Yeah. No. Can we do 50-50?
Sure.
I love Boyce. I think what you guys have done, what you continue to do is amazing. And again, it's not a zero-sum game, right? I do think that there's enough wealth in this community that we can figure out how to address the inequities, right? If we have people that don't have access because of systemic racism, let's address that by providing, access to some of that support. And that's what I should have said initially and not picked on the arts community. It's just an easy one.
Yeah, thank you. Matthew, did you have anything to add to this list of?
Yeah, most definitely. A few things, specifically when we speak of economic justice, I really want us to really lean into the word justice. And that is, there has been a harm, right? So we have to undo the harm, right? And so we have to really look at the direct investment in communities that have been harmed historically here in Iowa specifically. In addition to that, we also have to be good stewards, right? Good stewards of resources, good stewards of wealth, good stewards of our time, our talent, and treasure, as Tracy mentioned that. But also we got to be good stewards of the language that we use specifically. There's certain words in communities, in Black communities, brown communities, that just are, I would say they are words that strike a nerve for folks, right? When you start talking about investment in the Black community, people start getting uncomfortable. When you start talking about innovation in a brown community, people just really don't know what that looks like, right? But these are things that are happening all the time, but they're happening on a very small scale. And so what we have to really be able to do is, when we think of storytelling, we have to make sure that we're careful with the language that we use, that we have a shared narrative that is very asset focused and not focused on the harms that we've all caused or that we've all been a part of, but actually are really lifting up those that oftentimes don't get a chance to really get seen or get their voices heard in those instances. So when I think of economic justice, I'm really thinking of undoing the harm, right? By actually replacing that harm with a seed of good. And if we can continue to set those types of breadcrumbs, we'll be doing some really good things as the economic lens continues to broaden.
Well said. Daria, you work with a lot of communities and you work with a lot of students. Like, how are you guiding your students to become leaders as they go out into the world? And maybe this isn't fair because you didn't prep for this question, but I thought maybe you could weigh in here with the work that you're doing.
Yeah, no, I completely second what Tracy and Matthew said, and those are, I would say, versions of conversations that I have with my students. I think, one is they might be one kind of a lawyer or another kind of a lawyer, but they're still citizens who participate in their community. And you can do that meaningfully by thinking about how you spend your money. And you can do that meaningfully by thinking about where you rent or buy property and what that means for your neighbors. You can run for office. You can see a gap and try to fill it, that there's, sort of what we do as lawyers can be really meaningful, but what you do as sort of a citizen of your community is just as meaningful. I also think just as a white person taking some ownership and responsibility for the situation that we are currently in. For me as a lawyer, I take very seriously that economic development and lack of economic development is largely because of laws, right? It might be because of culture, it might be because of lots of other things, but fundamentally it is because of laws. And so I see a lot of my responsibility as training lawyers to see their role in the harm that has happened and to take responsibility for that and see it as their professional obligation to undo some of that harm.
An interesting thing that I don't think I quite realized, because a lot of the things that you said are reminding me about the way that we're, the conversations that we're having in the School of Planning and Public Affairs as well, right? So we think about policy and we think about programming, and it's not okay. It's not okay just to kind of use the status quo and not challenge power dynamics, not interrogate systems anymore, right? So that's the type of training that we want to do. And the thing that I'm realizing is that the four of us all are working with young people, right? So I think that's an opportunity for these future, to help guide future leaders to be the people that are really driving this change, right? And Matthew, I know that you're spending a lot of time in schools, and Tracy, you have a lot of programming for kids as well. So I think we got a pretty wide range of age groups covered among the four of us here too.
I would also just say to Tracy's point about sort of philanthropy, I think it's really easy to think like, I have $20 I can give someplace this year, or $50 I can give someplace this year, and that's not going to change anything. But I just had an instance where I was like, oh, that's actually not true, because I was one of those people who gave $20 to somebody, and it turns out that 80 other people did it the last minute, and it got an organization over its threshold, and it opened up a $10,000 match, and somebody else was so impressed by that, they gave the organization another $5,000. And I was like, well, that's not really helping, but you really don't know. So even if it's your $20, if you have that money to give, really thinking, I think, intentionally about where you give it and why. So give it to Tracy or give it to Matthew.
I will take it. But also, Daria, to that point, when we started, focusing on increasing diversity in STEM, knowing we didn't want someone's socioeconomic status to be a barrier, we curated a STEM kit, and it's everything that someone needs to do 13 hands-on STEM projects, and that we were able to get the cost of that down to $55. So you think about you and Travis and Jason, making a $20 donation might not seem like much, but that's the tools that one student of color didn't have before, right? So I think we just need to bring it down to that personal level. I'm reminded all the time that it's bird by bird, right? It's one-on-one conversations. That's how we make change, especially locally. Most of us want to paint with a big, broad paintbrush and think we're going to make huge sweeping changes. And I'm not sure that that's likely to happen, but I do know what happens is this conversation that we've had right here has changed the minds of at least one person. And so that's time well spent. So $20, that's $20 well spent. This is an hour well spent. This is what we need to be focusing on and normalize this.
Any other favorite nonprofit organizations that should be mentioned here? And I should mention that as a board member of a local arts nonprofit, Public Space One, we love to get $20 from people. So
there's a lot. I mean, I think a Dream City, the work that Fred is doing in the South District, that's huge. Deb from Open Heartland. I mean, there's just so many, great nonprofits that are doing the work that we're all doing. I'm in this space of the Iowa City Bike Library right now. They've been gracious enough to rent us space that they didn't need, so we can build a maker space that will be free to the community, and we'll focus on programs again geared towards people of color in our community. They certainly could use $20. So I mean, there's no shortage. I think when I talked to Mayor Teague a couple of years ago, he mentioned that there are over 500 nonprofit organizations in Johnson County, I think, which is just mind-boggling to me. So certainly a lot, but those are kind of my top 5 people I love, people that I really respect, and I do a lot of work with.
I'll add, I mentioned Public Space One, that there's a program that we have that's connected to this idea of social justice with a very kind of particular focus. It's the Center for Afrofuturist Studies. And so that brings Black artists to Iowa City or supports local Black artists. And the work that they're doing is about building community and is about all of these things that we're talking about. And so it's an organization that, and it's not one that I spend a lot of time in as a volunteer for Public Space One, but the work that they're doing is incredible, and that they're always looking for support as well.
I got a huge list. I won't even name them. 24/7 Black, Iowa Core, Amani Services. That's just in the Black Hawk County area. Then I think outside of that, broadly, Hip Hope. There's what is it? There's a few others. I got so many. I don't even want to undermine anybody, but please give your community foundations. Many of them have a directory of different areas and different folks that you can give to. I definitely will send a list to Jennifer as well, so at least you have that. But definitely giving is important, and it definitely helps support the shared economy and the shared ecosystem that is important to our fabric here in Iowa, here in the heartland.
I'm not going to make a pitch for specific nonprofits, but just in general to say that so many of the clients that my clinic has worked with are people in the community who are like, that is messed up. Right. So also I would say that just don't underestimate your ability when you're the person who's like, that it does not seem right, or that is not okay in my community, to say it to somebody else who might agree. Right. That's how coalitions get built. And I mean, not to sound like a Pollyanna, but a lot of change happens because of people being like, that's not okay, who are not maybe people who would normally be involved or see themselves as social change makers.
And don't forget about those organizations that have been doing the work, right, and continue to do the work. Your Boys and Girls Club, right? Areas that are really focused on just continuing to drive a particular area of focus. That is so important in our communities.
So I just want to pop in, and I'm sorry, my video got stopped. Jason and I had a back and forth. Jason, it turns out I cannot turn my video back on. But I know we're at the end of our time, and Travis, I don't want to cut you off if you have a final question, but I have a feeling that that this is a video that is going to get shared a fair amount from messages I've already been getting. So I just want people to know that in the event program page for this on the Obermann Center's website, I'm going to make a really strong effort to link to all of the organizations that have been mentioned, particularly in these last like kind of 4 or 5 minutes, but throughout, because there's just so many resources. This has been such a rich conversation in that regard. So that's all I wanted to add. And then Travis, go ahead.
I think wrapping it up with a list of organizations doing good work and talking about supporting them is kind of a nice way to wrap it up. But I, just on a personal note, I really look forward to continuing to work with everybody that's on my screen right now, and I'm glad to know that the people here are actively involved in our community, and I just want to say thanks to all of you.